I'm living 5 minutes from the sea.
So, Paul, I invited you as you are leading an incredible project called Sussex Bay, where you are. It is taking place on the south coast of England. And what I particularly like about it is that it is a local restoration project that involves and invites the whole local community to participate, no matter who you are and what you do.
So I'm sitting here in my role, which is varied, but I have the sustainability agenda and responsibility for the council's response to the climate crisis and to decarbonisation, things like that. The initial sort of carbon thinking, we thought, well, if we're going to need to do carbon offsetting at some point in the future, which is probably a little bit will be needed, then really we should have some local projects rather than buy trees in places further afield. So we thought, well, you know, let's think about that. What projects are around? And we found that they were extremely limited, if any at all. And there's so many different issues and barriers and pressures, you know, from sewage pollution to the pollution that comes from farmland and into the rivers and into the sea. There was something about this idea of Sussex Bay immediately being broader than just nature recovery. Nature recovery is what's needed, is the catalyst for a different future. You know, it's a different relationship with nature, and of course, you know, it's the communities and the local businesses and the public authorities that have to have a new relationship with nature. There's so much opportunity to think about future generations and what kind of habitats, what kind of place we want to leave them and encourage them to look after it in a different way. Like I say, to move from that extractive kind of out of sight, out of mind. There's at least 4 places in the UK, and there are others, where the collaboration and the open sharing is an opportunity to make each of those projects better and hopefully to get towards a bit of a template for how to do this kind of thing well in more and more places around the UK.
Paul, hello and welcome to the Shades of Life podcast.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. It's great to be here and talking to you. It's brilliant.
Yes, so we know it's a hot day. I've got the fan on.
Yeah, sweating here on the coast of Sussex Bay, and I could rather prefer going in the water, I think, at the moment.
Yes. So, Paul, I invited you as you are leading an incredible project called Sussex Bay, where you are. It is taking place on the south coast of England. And what I particularly like about it is that it is a local restoration project that involves and invites the whole local community to participate, no matter who you are and what you do. I really wanted to cover this project with you as an incredible example of local restoration, but also community building. It's 2 things that I've been very impressed with what you do. With the depletion of our environments on a global basis, it is something that literally we need to happen everywhere in the world, hopefully. And you are doing it right where you are, so we can really do with your input and insights today. As one of my recent guests said, local action and the sum of many local actions is what can lead to global change, not only the top-down policies. So can we start by getting acquainted with your local region? Can you tell us about Sussex Bay? Kind of draw a map for us with some key parameters. Where is it? How big is it? How many people live there? What makes your region so special?
Yeah, sure. So here I am sat in Worthing, actually, on the Sussex coast. So in terms of council boundaries and things, there are two big parts of Sussex, so West Sussex and East Sussex, but Sussex Bay spans all of the Sussex coastline, the whole Sussex coastline from Bill through to Camber Sands. So it's a really big stretch of coastline, about 100 miles. And Sussex Bay is really there to help us think about Sussex as a blue space with amazing river systems coming down through into the Sussex Bay area. And if you look at it on the map, you can sort of see two sweeping bays which make it up. It's a bit like a seagull shape. So two big bays, and Sussex Bay is really there to say, at that level of geography, Sussex, which is quite a famous name and quite easy to identify, shouldn't we be thinking more about our blue spaces, the rivers, the coast and the sea, and that sense of a geography, but also that sense of, as I'm sure we'll come on to talk about, a mission to restore nature in that environment and really wake up to the fact that Sussex is very blue as well as the amazing greens of the South Downs. And in terms of like how far up it goes and how far into the sea it goes, we're talking about how far the tide goes in and out. So where I live in Stenning, for example, which is 6 miles inland, it's very much tidal. You know, the river level comes up and down, and kayakers have to time their adventures up and down the river. So that's a whole natural ecosystem of the water coming in and out, and we're really interested in that bit because that's where we need to be working as well as in the marine environment. And then going out to sea, the UK territorial waters go out to 12 nautical miles, which is more or less the same as 12 miles. And we're really interested to think about that whole space. But there's a lot of stuff that we should be doing in the what's called the inshore waters, which is about 6 miles out. So we're talking about rivers into the local marine environment. And I should say, we reckon there's about 1 million residents in that area. And the other thing we're trying to do is not be too precise. So we haven't drawn it perfectly on a map. And that's intentional because as we speak to people, as we make connections to people on those boundaries, if you like, then we don't want to be limited by saying, well, that's not in our area, that's in your area. Actually, what matters is the work, and to really look at those interconnected systems all the way along the coast is really important. But, you know, simply put, it's the Sussex coastline.
Yeah, that's incredible. I actually really love that about your project and your approach to it, because you almost make people rediscover where they live with elements, whether it's the sea, the rivers, the land, everything in between. Yeah, that's really beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, going back to the genesis of the project, could you tell us how did Sussex Bay start as a project? How many people were involved in it at the very beginning of it?
So I'm actually a director at the local council here, Worthing Council and Ada Council, and so I'm sitting here in my role, which is varied, but I have the sustainability agenda and responsibility for the council's response to the climate crisis and to decarbonisation, things like that. So as part of that work, we, in the early days, started to think about not just how do we decarbonise our council, but what's our role? You know, councils are kind of uniquely placed to sort of care about whole places, not just their own organisation. So we were immediately thinking about broader things, and we, as part of the initial sort of carbon thinking, we thought, well, if we're going to need to do carbon offsetting at some point in the future, which is probably a little bit will be needed, then really we should have some local projects rather than buy trees in places further afield. So we thought, well, you know, let's think about that. What projects are around? And we found that they were extremely limited, if any at all. And so we started to think about that. And then very quickly, when you start thinking about carbon offsetting, you immediately think about the natural environment. And obviously, carbon is sequestered in all sorts of habitats. And so we very quickly started caring just about nature recovery for its own sake. You know, things like carbon offsetting are just kind of early initial stages of thinking about how to restore our ecosystem, right, and get carbon stored in the right places. So then we developed an approach to nature recovery. And of course, we sitting here by the sea, we can pretty much see the sea out of the window. Historically, councils have not really paid huge amounts of attention to the seascape. And, you know, doing some research, finding the amazing kelp project, which was being thought about. And we can probably come onto that in more detail, but thinking about these local projects. So I joined the steering group for the kelp project locally to restore these massive kelp beds. And there's a chap called Sean Ashworth in this meeting, and we were talking about how habitats are really interconnected. You know, you can't sort of see things in isolation.
Yeah.
And so he was describing this. He says, of course, it's not just about kelp restoration, it's about oysters and this and that, and they're all connected. And he said, this is all part of the Sussex Bay ecosystem. And I hadn't heard that phrase before at all. You know, literally, it wasn't in the public language at all.
Yeah.
And it turns out local fishers use that just to describe where they fish. And that was an immediate kind of moment of, I had to check with him, you know, what was that you just said? Because that sounds really amazing, and a way to sort of bring all of this thinking together. And so Sussex Bay was born in that moment, really, where it just really made sense to think about things in this multi-habitat, place-based way. Sussex Bay felt immediately like an amazing name for something which could drive us towards thinking about things at the big enough scale, really, in a way that's easy to understand.
Yeah, that's a great story. I love how it started, because it started through discussions with local people, obviously. I loved also what you said about, it is true, we are always asked to invest in projects far away. And it's have a balance, you know, planting trees to reforest, you know, the forest of Borneo, where orangutans live. Yes, I'm totally into this. But
Yeah.
not make us forget where we live locally, and to invest locally, as you said. And that's the beauty of your project, I think, and people are really buying into this.
Yeah.
So I think, so you told us how you got involved. I wanted to ask you, so what is your role as part of the Sussex Bay project today, and how big is the team behind it?
Yeah, so I've got a busy day job. I'm director here for sustainability and resources, which is a bunch of other teams. And you know, my role with Sussex Bay is as its essentially director, you know, leading the work. And then we have Dean Spears, who spoke at our amazing launch. He's what we call the head of Blue Natural Capital, which is all about kind of valuing the habitats and trying to unlock funding for projects. So he's essentially the day-to-day full-time lead for the whole piece of work. And then just yesterday, actually, it was really exciting to meet properly Lewis White, his first day with us. He's our marine scientist. He's going to be doing and leading, convening all of the scientists and people who really are expert in bringing together that knowledge to be able to create a master plan, if you like, a strategy for what we do.
Yeah, I mean, you are very well surrounded. I met Dean and he's so lovely, but perhaps I will do a podcast with him in the future, because I think the founding element of a restoration project, as we know, is very important.
Yeah.
So, brand image of a project. So, one thing that I picked up immediately, perhaps because I worked in branding marketing in my life, is that you have great branding. And to me, it really helps to give Sussex Bay an identity, garner and stimulate people's attention and imagination around the project. But also, most importantly, perhaps it really helps to crystallize the vision for the project. So could you tell us how it came to be? Because I find it a very important element, for people who would want to start a project like yours. I think that's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, I mean, I think there might be something. So we had the name, and I described how sort of naturally that just landed as an amazing name. And then we commissioned some help from a local company called Way Forward, who've been amazing, and they've essentially got an ecosystem of incredible local companies, local specialists, and they brought this amazing graphic designer into the conversation. And we were talking about, if you like, how the branding and the website was so important to be a place for people to connect into the idea and the ambition and the vision of the thing early. So whilst we didn't necessarily have lots of projects underway and lots of people and so on, to actually start to show the ambition in that way, and if you like, the professionalism of it, and the fact that it's more than an environmental project, and to do branding which indicated and spoke to the fact that this could be something really big and broad in terms of what it ends up being. So we wanted to pay attention to that branding in the beginning to create, if you like, that sense of being able to design into something beautiful and something big. And the branding comes really from, so the S and the B were immediately shapes that lended themselves to the downs. So there's something about the downland, which is beautifully curved. And then, of course, the seascape and the waves and so on. And so just those letters lended themselves, I think, to the visual imagery. And then the color palette that was created was just amazing, because we have these natural colors of blue and green for the seaweed and so on, and browns and things. But then also, I think what they call kind of sort of signature colors or whatever, which are the orange of the buoys that float in the sea, just as a contrast. So it all made a lot of sense and brought in the fishing community into that space as well. So we didn't have to do much to it. It just came, again, a bit like the language just came, the graphic designer and the conversations that were had. This was presented to us, and it was like, wow, that's just brilliant. Kind of really no comment.
Yeah, it is so impactful, really well balanced. I actually love your explanations behind the colors, because I didn't know them. It just makes sense. And when you see it, it's so impactful. I will put a link to your website in the show notes, by the way, and I will also create an article on Scarlet Threads magazine about your project, so people can see more about it and visualize it as well.
Yeah.
So moving to your the restoration part of your project, for us to understand what is at stake. So what are the restoration needs in Sussex Bay? What are we talking about in your region that needs to be addressed, and perhaps talking about the biggest things?
Yeah. So I mentioned Lewis starting yesterday. He's our marine scientist, and he's going to really get into the detail of the data. There's loads of data and really broad understanding of the environment, but no one's really ever brought it together at this scale. So I think we're going to very quickly get a rich picture of all of the issues. I mean, there's so many different issues and barriers and pressures, from sewage pollution to the pollution that comes from farmland and into the rivers and into the sea. There's sediment that gets churned up by activities in the seascape like dredging and dumping gravel and things like that. There's all sorts of pressures.
Yeah.
And one of the big themes is going to be working on how do we understand those issues and start to address them. And obviously that's really complex work with multiple stakeholders trying to change behaviours that allow the seascape to not be put under so much pressure. So we're going to do a big piece on really mapping those problems. But there are also really amazing maps already out there from national studies and so on, which start to show us what habitats used to be in Sussex Bay and over the years have been lost. So the big one, which is already being tackled, is the huge kelp forest off the West Sussex coast, which was just massive back in the day. So if you were to go onto Worthing Beach, you know, in 1980, 1985 and before, you would have seen, and obviously most of it hidden under the water, but you would have been looking at 176 kilometres squared of thick kelp forest stretching from Brighton all the way over to Bognor Regis, just a huge underwater forest, which was the habitat for the most amazing life, you know, lobsters, shellfish, nursery grounds for fish, just an enormous safe ecosystem, like a nursery for all of the life out there. And that disappeared. That was ripped up in the storm of 1987, the famous big storm. Kelp is broadly in two bits. It's got a really solid root in the seabed, in the rock, and then most of it sort of breaks off every year, but the roots stay. So this storm came along and ripped up all of the top bit, but it created a really open seascape. You imagine it was thick with vegetation, and then it all went. And then the trawling boats, the big trawling boats, took the opportunity to come into those new fishing grounds and fish with trawling. And what trawling does, obviously bottom trawling, is plough up the seabed. So it ploughed up the roots, it broke up the seabed, the stable seabed that the kelp needed, and it ripped it up. And so it couldn't do its natural annual regeneration cycle. It was ripped up from the roots. That is a huge loss. And a few years ago, again at the event, we spoke about, and we had these amazing people telling us about it from other projects. The local regulator, the Inshore Fisheries Association, through community pressure and then really thinking about what it needed to do, created an exclusion zone. So it took a while to bring the law in, the bylaw in, but trawling has been banned for several years now from that big area, which is going to allow the kelp to recover, we hope. And that trawler exclusion zone is a really key intervention, and then the kelp project is there to sort of do the science and do the recovery work on top of that. So kelp in West Sussex is a big thing, but also across Sussex there were huge historic oyster beds, and you can go back to maps from, you know, the late 1800s and see these amazing large oyster beds. And in fact, from what I understand, there were just thousands of kilometers squared of oyster beds from here to France, into, you know, on the seabed.
Wow.
Just enormous quantities of oysters and mussels as well. Now, a lot of that's been churned up and ripped up as well. And so what we would expect Lewis to do, our marine scientist, is to come along and start to map these big habitats that used to be there, which aren't there anymore, and start to identify the projects that we need to get going to recover those big habitats. And I think there's also going to be some stuff around, you know, what does climate change mean? So I think it's not necessarily going to be as easy as what did we have in 1960? Let's recover that, because it might be that sea temperature rise and other things mean that it needs to be different. So that will be a journey of kind of learning and thinking. But broadly, we know that the seabed used to be full of these kind of foundational habitats, kelp and oysters and seagrass over towards Rye and far East Sussex. And we need to really understand that and start, you can imagine visualizing kind of what it could be, and then start to create projects from there.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I love everything you mentioned. Trolling, I think it started to be banned in some countries as well, which is good.
Absolutely.
I love your explanation about how it affects the kelp. And I think it's important that people understand why should we ban trolling, or, or where. Yeah, that's fascinating. So I think through what you shared with us already, we can see that you are involving various people with various talents, scientists, marketing, etc. So I'd like to talk a little bit about local community involvement, because for me, that's a big aspect of what you do. So you launched the Sussex Bay project at an event in Brighton, around mid-June, and I was there, and I've been so impressed. And what impressed me the most has been the incredible sense of community and how motivated the local people were to participate. It was totally incredible. There were people in the room from all the different towns and areas of Sussex Bay, all ages, all genders, all backgrounds, and they were all coming together. And there was an incredible energy in the room. You've probably felt it yourself throughout the afternoon. So one big question I wanted to ask you, because for other people, who want to work on restoration projects locally, how did you get to that point of getting the local community already so engaged?
Yeah, I mean, it was so amazing, and I was really pleased to see so many different types of people, as you say, and I think that was so I guess the starting point was kind of who cares about nature recovery. And of course, what can happen is that scientists or environmental groups, quite understandably, do that kind of work on in their field, as it were, and crack on with amazing projects and do community engagement around those projects, and it's brilliant. But there was something, going back to the branding conversation we had, there was something about this idea of Sussex Bay immediately being broader than just nature recovery. Nature recovery is what's needed, is the catalyst for a different future. It's a different relationship with nature, and of course, it's the communities and the local businesses and the public authorities that have to have a new relationship with nature for it to be completely different from the extractive example of that trawling, which was just ripping stuff up, and taking all of the fish, through to something which is much more symbiotic and mutually helpful, our relationship with nature. And so when thinking about who to reach out to, who to speak to, it's everybody. Everybody needs to be given the opportunity to think about the future and have an optimistic and practical way of engaging. And so the work that we did in the lead up to the event, if you like, is the secret, which was literally thousands of conversations with people, with groups, with individuals, with those people who are really well networked that can pass the story on. And so it wasn't out of the blue, that event. It wasn't as if we did a little bit of preparation and then just marketed it. It came from 2 or 3 years worth of developing conversations And so I think the energy and the goodwill in the room was a lot about the fact that people already knew quite a lot, not everybody, but a lot of people knew already quite a lot about the project and the thinking, and they knew us as people as well. A lot of people knew me, and I'd spoken to them, and similarly with Dean and the other folk from Way Forward, Rob and Diet Way Forward, really passionate and connected, and all of those conversations that many people have built this kind of goodwill, which really was just kind of crystallized on the day, I guess.
Yeah, and yeah, it was so obvious. And as you say, we don't see all the work you've done before, but we see. Yeah, so we don't see all the work you've done before, but obviously it all came together at this event. And I think that was also the beauty of it, as you explained. So to dive a little bit deeper into this, what difference do you think it makes in a restoration project to have everyone from the local community involved and on board with it? What are the advantages, not only for the project, but for the people locally, for the economy, etc.?
Yeah, and so if you heard a bong, it was the town hall bells there earlier.
I figured that.
I managed to mute. I think that, I mean, the importance of something like this is that a couple of people, Dean and I, or with Lewis as well, we can't really decide and manage and control what happens to Sussex Bay. You know, it's a big, open idea, and we, as if you like, the core team can sort of drive the work forward, and then the big thing will be to open up to other people and to say, what do you make of it? What response do you want to make to this challenge, this mission? And so I think the work to connect with communities and individuals and businesses is going to be all about allowing people to feel as though it's a thing which they can pick up and develop projects with, develop thoughts about, make suggestions. And so the sense of a movement of people able to come together and talk about things and make sure things are kind of aligning, but also for there to be a lot of innovation and flourishing of ideas and people feeling as though they can help in their own communities. So Sussex Bay, as I mentioned earlier, is a huge geography, 100 miles. You know, to drive from here to Rye is probably a couple of hours. So it's a big place, and so we need each individual town and community to have the connection to Sussex Bay and make something of it for themselves. So we're going to be thinking quite a lot about what that means to enable a huge movement of people to maybe amplify the work that they're already doing, you know, to connect the work that they're already doing in their local community to this broader mission, to feel as though they can create a Sussex Bay project and get our help to get that off the ground. And Dean's just started to begin that sense of movement building. Dean's just started to create a bunch of community network conversations. So I think this week we had one on creative. So we invited people from the creative community just to jump online and talk about their interest and desire to be a part of Sussex Bay, what that looks like. I think it's going to be as much with people meeting each other as meeting us. So creating those networks. We had one on finance and funding, and we're going to create these different networks, and then obviously from time to time bring people together in bigger groups so that you get that cross fertilization. But I think it's going to continue to, like I said about the event, it's going to continue to be about thousands of conversations whilst we're doing practical work as well, and getting that sense of a movement, that sense of many flowers blooming over the years to contribute to that big mission, which I think is, decades long.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you're creating beautiful foundations. And I think that's the role of a leader to set the tone and set the impulse. And I think you do this in such an open and welcoming way. That's really perhaps one of the things that impressed me the most. I was also asking this question because it's not a given. And myself, I had quite a negative experience recently because I was working in a place in London, which was a big community center with lots of showrooms. It was more about the interior design community, and so many people were raising issues. And the fact is the place was managed by a center and there was no communication between the center and the people of the community. And I organized a meeting with them earlier this year. And I said to them, well, I've been really surprised since I've started working here because there is nothing in place to meet with you, at least even if it's once a year. And basically the answer we got is that we are not interested. This is not going to, yeah. So what you do is the exact opposite. And that is so refreshing and just the type of environment that you want, especially as you say, it's a big project. It's something long term that's going to benefit everybody in the region and even beyond. And I think the way you've created these foundations is really beautiful and exactly what's needed.
I think so often people, I think there's a couple of things that might be going on for people. One is that, because obviously working in a local authority where there's limited people and limited money, there's a fear of opening up because it'll be like, blimey, we're just going to get lots more work and lots more complaint and hassle. And yet the beauty of it is that if you're open, then people understand more easily what the issues are, even if it's, because I think the issues for us will be, it's going to be really hard to keep communicating really well to all the people. But in trying to do that and creating these groups that I mentioned, people will understand that it's just, Sussex Bay is a couple of people who are trying to do lots of things at once, and so there'll be just simply basic understanding of, oh, that's fair enough. I know that you haven't got time to do this all the time, so I understand. I'm not gonna complain, and just to have that kind of human reality, of people. We're all just trying to do something together. It's not hierarchical. Everybody. I was speaking to somebody yesterday actually who working at another council, and he said the way that he convenes people is when they come in is to say, can you put your ID badge for your company in the bin, metaphorically, just put it away. We're all here because we care about this thing. And let's talk about it. What energy and what skill is in the room, and how can we make progress, and how can we have difficult conversations sometimes if we're a bit annoyed with each other for whatever reason, and how can that just be a healthy thing of a group of people trying to make progress.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned the challenges because they do exist independently of the style of leadership, for sure.
Yeah.
So something I loved at the event is that you brought people of the local community to speak on stage. So it wasn't just you, it was a lot of other people. And these people shared their experience, which made it very real and tangible for the audience. But it also really helped in connecting with the issues and what we can do about it through their own experience. And I remember in particular this dad, a bit older, and daughter who are diverse, And the dad told us about the evolution he saw over the decades of Sussex underwater, and I think you described this earlier. And I described how the bay went from having a very abundant wildlife to being very depleted, and he was almost in tears at some point.
Mm.
Can you tell us perhaps a little bit about that aspect in particular? Because myself being in the audience at the event, I think people don't realize what type of wildlife they actually have on their doorstep. And myself, I was like, wow, there is this in these waters in the south of England. I had no idea. And also people don't realize how abundant this wildlife used to be. And I think you mentioned that already.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, to some extent, the wildlife is coming back, particularly with the trawler ban. You know, the dolphin pods. You know, I'm not a scientist, but you know, the story goes that if there is something to eat, then the predators will come, and so the whole food chain, you know, is gradually recovering. Hence, the dolphins are a good sign that there are fish there, and. And Eric, you mentioned Eric Smith and his daughter Katrine Priestley are just these amazing community activists. And I was really lucky to be taken out just a few weekends ago to dive on Bognor Reef to see it for myself. We went out, and Eric showed me the ropes of where to go to spot some beautiful wildlife underwater. And it's, you know, Sussex Bay is about all of the people and all of the projects that are already doing amazing things. And you know, Sussex Bay is really just an ecosystem of folk able to join together a little bit more and to have their stories told. And at the event, we were really keen to, you know, for the event to be like that. These are the stories from Sussex Bay. These are the people from Sussex Bay, and they were here well before we were. And it was, you know, really important. And going back to Sussex Bay is a geography that, in a sense, has always been there, you know, for thousands of years. And in a sense, we're just putting the spotlight on it in a way. And so to be able to do that, and for Eric and Katrine, who just do amazing work, they go around to schools on using their voluntary time to go out to schools and engage kids and tell them about the sea life out there. And, you know, they're reaching thousands of local kids, and this is just exactly the sort of thing we want to encourage and support and help out where we can.
Yeah, I think it's really sure that it's also the local people who make the local area, and it's really brought it to life in a different way and in a very beautiful way. I really love that aspect of the event for sure. Childhood memories. So many of your guest speakers, including yourself, went back to their childhood and moments they spent in the bay as an anchor point for their motivation to preserve this area. There was, for example, Lewis Crathern, a very famous pro-kite surfer and British champion, absolutely amazing. And these people also made the link with the legacy they want to leave to their own children, and they shared pictures of their families, and them being able to experience the bay in the same way that they did. So can you tell us a little bit about that? And was it something important for you to share? Because at the end of the day, what we are creating today is what we are leaving to our children tomorrow, obviously.
Totally, as you say at the event, there were so many people that are born and bred locally that have their own childhood experiences. Eric was upset when he was speaking, you know, for all sorts of reasons, I'm sure. But you know, he dived in that kelp forest as a kid in the 50s and 60s, and he misses it.
Yeah.
And he also knows that he wants his grandchildren to enjoy something like that. in the future. And so it's upsetting to know that it's really kind of that magical forest has been lost. And Lewis, the surfer, windsurfer, has been just an incredible, more sporty manifestation of what it is to enjoy that environment. And he's been surfing in off the Worthing coast and off the Sussex coast all his life, and that sense of enjoyment, he wants to pass that on. And he does these amazing talks at schools about the value of wind energy. So he's connected his kite surfing with telling kids in a more engaging way about the power of the wind and obviously renewable energy and that kind of thing. So he's busy telling that story. My story was about visiting my nan in Sussex and fishing off the pier and catching mackerel, and these are really strong memories for me. And I also talked about how there's a statistic which tells us that 20% of local kids haven't even visited the beach, which is like, how can that be possible? But it is. Some families just aren't, didn't do it themselves as kids, don't really think about doing it, and it's just incredible. And so there's so much opportunity to think about future generations and what kind of habitats, what kind of place we want to leave them, and encourage them to look after it in a different way. Like I say, to move from that extractive kind of out of sight, out of mind way of thinking to something which is much more engaged. So the people that spoke about their photos that they showed were all about saying how important it is to engage in recovering nature in our area and give our future generations the chance to enjoy it like we did.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love this obviously human part, but it's transmission across generations. And also, perhaps, as you mentioned, making other people discover the bay who perhaps haven't discovered it, enjoy it as much as perhaps did. Yeah, that's really beautiful.
Yeah.
So that was a bit more of the local people part. I wanted to talk businesses as well, because many people, sponsors, local businesses are already supporting the Sussex Bay project. So again, with the idea to share your experience with this, could you tell us what is your approach with it? Do you layer, for example, the type of people you work with, and do you segment it into businesses, private individuals, schools, perhaps? Who are the important actors or group of actors for you as part of the Sussex Bay project?
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of different types of investor and funder out there, and broadly speaking, we have a sense of the different types of investor and funder that are out there. But I think it comes back to the main thing being about building relationships, because this whole world, so there's this whole language of natural capital, which, like with investing in carbon offsetting, there's talk about companies realizing the impact that they're having on nature and the reliance that they have on nature, which is something that they historically haven't had to pay for. They've just taken it. So I think this is going to require all sorts of legislation in the future. But what some leading companies are doing are thinking about their position as a brand and thinking about, we need to understand our impact on nature and our reliance on nature, and we need to start quantifying that and start thinking about that, reporting on that, and paying for it. And yet that journey is really at the beginning. So the sort of companies that are helping us at the moment are companies that are way ahead and on a very voluntary basis, helping to build a local opportunity for the future of paying for nature. So Sam Zindel at PropellerNet, a local digital agency in Brighton, have sponsored us at this really early stage because they just care about it, but they also want to see this new world opening up where local companies can start to put money into local nature projects rather than, again, further afield. So because it's so early, we're not expecting investors as such. We just want to build a conversation with businesses about that future. How are they getting on with understanding their impact on nature? What kind of support can they give us at this early stage? And frankly, it can just be by just helping us think and talk. And then hopefully over time, they'll get into understanding how they want to position themselves as a company. And we'll be there to help connect them to projects that they can fund. And so it's a journey. On the bigger stage, there's all sorts of organisations like the Crown Estate, who own the seabed, who are going to be licensing a lot of wind farms in the future, particularly with the change of government and the direction that that's going in. So the Crown Estate will be really interested to unlock these wind farm projects by making sure they have nature projects to push compensation payments into, all the way through to these local SMEs that we want to go on a journey with, to see if we can create projects that they can fund, and also for their staff to volunteer in. So we're keeping it quite open and quite conversational to just understand what this new world's going to look like, I think.
Yeah, and I find that very important. I mean, the way I see it is that you are creating the opportunity.
Yeah.
Like with any other project, you know, there will be people who will be there from the beginning and others who will join along the journey, as you said. But at least you are creating the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's going to be, you know, by co-producing the projects with funders and companies and things, just doing that in the open, then they can help say, well, if you did it this way, we'd be a bit more interested. So, for example, if you were to create an element of that project which engaged with disadvantaged children as well as doing the nature recovery, then that's really exciting for us. We can get behind that. So in having those conversations, we can shape the project as long as those outcomes fit with the mission. Then we can tailor projects to fit funders' expectations and desires. So I think that could be really, really interesting to design things with potential funders.
Yeah, and I find it so important because obviously there is nothing locally yet. I'm sure over time people are going to look more and more at what exists locally. And if there is nothing, then there is nothing. But if there is something like you, then they find you and they can start, you know, a conversation with you. So I wanted to bring up a specific example that I discovered at your event and that I loved, which is about the local port. And I would have thought about that myself if you didn't bring it up. So I remember the speech. It was someone called Tom Willis, the chief executive of, I'm not going to pronounce it correctly, Shoreham Port.
Yeah.
And Tom went on in explaining that he's one of the only 2 ports in the UK to be an eco port. And with all their accreditations, it placed Shoreham Port amongst the most environmentally proactive ports in the world, which is really impressive. So could you tell us a little bit about them and why is it important as part of the whole picture?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's probably worth starting to say, you know, Sussex Bay as a seascape has got lots of stuff going on, right? So we want to recover nature, and there are all sorts of activities in this mixed use seascape to think about. So Shoreham Port is a really good example of where the sea is being used in a very different way. You know, there are fishing groups that come and go from there. There is There are big ships that come in and out with transporting goods. There's all sorts of stuff going on there, and the port wants to obviously maintain those activities in a way which is more and more carbon and nature friendly. And Tom's just an incredible entrepreneurial leader that's trying to transition the port and its activities into this more low carbon, nature friendly future. And when we're thinking about the seascape, we're going to need to integrate the needs of others. So it's not going to be a pure idealistic, we only want to protect and conserve nature. That it's not going to be like that, because that's not, it's about working out how nature and other activities can be much more synchronized and integrated, so that they don't harm each other, but they're supportive of each other. And Shore & Port's all about that. They've got a big project underway, which is centrally government funded, to decarbonize their operations. There's quite a few businesses in the port area, and they're working with them to look at sort of mass decarbonisation of their operations. But they're also about to introduce something called the Southwick Reef, which is on one of the harbour walls, is to introduce tiles on the vertical wall that will help sea life flourish as the tide comes in and out. And they're going to put some artificial reef cubes that have got all sorts of indentations and things that are designed for creatures to live in. And so they're trying to sort of change the way that the port looks and feels and works, and more renewable energy and stuff. And Tom's been such a massive support for Sussex Bay. And I think the thing about Tom is that he gets, it's not just about Shore & Port, it's about Sussex Bay as a whole. And so we're reaching out and working with Newhaven Port, who are the other big port in the Sussex Bay area, starting to sort of broaden out that group of people who are thinking in that way.
Yeah, no, again, I think we said this already before, but I really love how everybody in the project is really embracing the whole community, as you said. That's really important. So you mentioned this already, but you have partnered with various non-profit organizations who are already very involved in the restoration of nature. So you mentioned the Crown Estate, the Sussex Kelp Recovery Project. There was Blue Marine Foundation as well, which is well known. So I wanted to ask you, because obviously when we are talking of a big restoration project like yours, there are already some people who are in place doing great things. How do you see it working with these organizations? Do you see Sussex Bay as an entity that can bring people together, including with non-profits and the work they do?
Yeah, definitely. So I see it as Sussex Bay as a local project has got loads of stakeholders, loads of groups, and that feeling of joining the local system together with the amazing volunteers and activists like Eric and Katrine, all the way from big organizations to community groups. That's one big job, which is about driving the Sussex Bay mission forward. But then on a broader stage still is the need to see if we can do something to help other Sussex Bays turn up around the UK, because that's really needed. That local coordination is really needed. And so when we reach out and work with people like Blue Marine Foundation or the Crown Estate, what we're doing there is talking to them about, are we creating a model, a template here that can be used elsewhere, and what's happening elsewhere that we can learn from to make Sussex Bay better. So the Solent is next door to us, the Portsmouth and surrounds, and the Solent work that Blue Marine have led on, the Solent Seascape project, was I think the first seascape project in the country. So that was a big inspiration to me, certainly to us, and continues to be like the sister project that we are building connections to. And then further still, we've been making really strong connections to Cornwall, who have been doing some amazing work. And up in Tyneside, there's a project called Stronger Shores, which is equally doing really amazing work. So there's at least 4 places in the UK, and there are others, where the collaboration and the open sharing is an opportunity to make each of those projects better, and hopefully to get towards a bit of a template for how to do this kind of thing well in more and more places around the UK. So we're as keen to build something that's easy to copy as we are just to focus on Sussex Bay, because it's so much, you know, the ambition should be big, right? To try and recover nature like at scale, in as many places as possible. So the work that we can do to create, so we want to create a network of project leaders so that we can start to talk to each other and compare notes. And maybe if we're good at one thing, we could say, well, this is how we did that. And if we can learn from others and pick up some learning from there, then of course that will make us go faster. So that network effect led through people like Blue Marine Foundation, the Crown Estate and others, and some of the national bodies like Natural England who we're speaking to, they can help us find a way so that people aren't reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, I love that spirit of collaboration. I find it so important. And, you know, the saying, together we are stronger, it's true locally, it's true with obviously your neighbors.
Yeah.
Everybody. So thank you for that, Paul. Another point I wanted to bring from your event, because a lot happened there.
Mm.
Had various guests at your event. Perhaps could be deemed as unusual when one think of tackling a restoration project. So, for example, you had people from the artist community, and the focus went on they do, and it was purely artistic to engage with the local community and the restoration projects. I also discovered someone who was actually just the weekend before at the United Nations for World Oceans Day. Dave Erasmus is actually an amazing entrepreneur who would do a lot of things. But basically shared with us some of his work with acoustics and how he uses AI and machine learning to process underwater listening data, making it easier to measure and monitor ocean biodiversity, for example. And we could hear some of his work. So I wanted to ask you, how important is it for you to be open to innovation, creative thinking, others' ideas when it comes to restoration projects, and perhaps things that are not obvious at first?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things there, I think. And Dave was amazing, wasn't it? It was so powerful to listen to the sea like that, listen to the coral reef, didn't we? And his ambition, which we really support, is to get some acoustic buoys out in Sussex Bay so that we can listen to the bay and stream that and engage people in it. And he was saying how it might be possible to detect fishing activity which is banned, by listening to it and listening out for it and stuff like that. So really interesting thinking. So there's one whole area, I think, on the use of technology to innovate, and we're going to be setting up something we call the Blue Natural Capital Lab, which is essentially an innovation lab where we want to really bring technologists into the conversation to think about like doing research and monitoring for things like, are the fish coming back? Is the kelp coming back? This is quite expensive stuff. You have to send people out, and the universities don't necessarily have loads of money to be able to do that. It's a bit of a struggle. So by bringing together technologists, we hope to be able to start to experiment on really cost-effective ways of monitoring. So you could do monitoring to show and live stream spaces so that people can engage and see what's under the water, but you can also do proper science. So on the technology side, people like Dave with the acoustics, people with drones, people who are good at using satellite images, we really want to be able to bring them into the innovation lab. And then the other piece, as you mentioned, is and at the event we had an artist and a cartoon artist and so on, because we know that, again, already there are so many painters, poets, theatre pieces, all sorts of things where people have been, you know, for centuries engaging with the seascape, and actually to be able to bring those creative responses together just helps us bring that voice into Sussex Bay, where people's responses to nature and their creative responses to nature are a part of it. So there's the technology stuff, and then there's the creative response that people have been making to the seascape for, as I say, centuries, that we also want to include and just foreground and help people engage. And hopefully there'll be projects that people can start to use the Sussex Bay mission and branding to make applications to people like the Arts Council, to get projects going that might engage with school groups, excluded groups, and that will just help them hopefully secure funding on that basis. And hopefully we might be able to show that this project could repeat itself along the coast quite easily, because the mechanism is there for a project to get bigger. So I think there's lots of opportunities there as well to help people get funding, get projects done, have their work celebrated and all sorts.
Yeah, I really love the diversity of your approach. Again, I think it's very inclusive, and some people might have some sensitivities or others. And also like the technological aspect, or with new technologies, as you said, it supports you in ways that hasn't been done before, but makes a big difference.
I think it's probably it probably is worth just underlining. We touched on, didn't we, kind of maybe it's not so easy all the time when trying to collaborate, when trying to do something like this. And I think the expectation is that we will need to have some really difficult conversations at times where ideas clash, you know, where a nature recovery project is really clashing with a group of fishermen or an activity at the port or something like that. And of course these difficulties we see all the time, and we're not going to avoid them, but hopefully we can create the spaces where these conversations can be had, hopefully from a foundation of some amount of trust and relationships already being established to some extent, and then being able to say things like, well, you know, we're all trying to make this work, we all mean well, but how do we get this to work in this mixed use seascape? How do we make sure we introduce new voices, even if it feels a little bit more complicated to start with? We can trust each other to work it through if it's facilitated well enough. There's an agency called the Marine Management Organization, which is involved in licensing activities in the sea, and they have this kind of, I forget what they call it, but it's like almost like a gamification of marine planning. So the marine planning is like what activities should be allowed where, and they have this game that they bring people to play, and you do role play. So what they tend to do is, if there's an environmental organization, they give them the role of the oil company.
Okay, that's great.
Or whatever. And so then they have to represent their needs into this conversation. And apparently it's really insightful in people. You know, sometimes you end up with an environmental activist really arguing for the new oil field because they've just got into the sense of like, oh, this is what I'm meant to do. This is my purpose. And so I think that can help break down kind of those entrenched positions a bit and understand each other a bit more.
Yeah, that's so important. Yeah, thank you so much for bringing this up. So in terms of prioritization, Paul, how do you prioritize the restoration project in Sussex Bay? And I know you explained to us your ways probably of identifying them. So perhaps do you have a specific timeline you are working with?
Yeah, so I mentioned Lewis, who's going to be building out the seascape recovery strategy. So we think that's going to be an iterative or step-by-step kind of process. So we're going to have like version 1 of that ready in the first 12 months, possibly like the real version 1 might come quite quickly, I think, just like the skeleton, the sketch. Because what we need to do is paint that initial picture. Sometimes I say, you know, the first bit is like just work in pencil. Sure. Like it doesn't have to be nailed down, just sketch it, and then we can share that and see what people think, and then kind of do that co-production thing, so that we test what people think early. So we might create a framework and test that early. But we want to create, you know, a publishable thing within the first 12 months. And then I think it will keep on changing, and it won't be like a master plan, which is fixed and written in pen. It will be almost like an opportunity map. So this is what used to be there. This is what could be over here, because the opportunity map is so much about like, how difficult is that to get going? Kind of just like in terms of rules and regulations and complexity. So that's really an important thing, but it's actually tricky. So this one over here probably is, for whatever reason, a bit easier to get going. So maybe let's do that. So it'd be quite opportunistic a little bit, and it will depend on who's interested in it, who wants to deliver it, who wants to fund it. So I think it's almost like a restaurant menu in my mind of, this is what we could do, which things shall we do next, and have that big picture, but then kind of bite it off in chunks.
It's so inspiring, honestly. I love that word, opportunity map. That sounds absolutely fantastic. So looking at the funding aspect of the project, because funding is an important aspect of any project, can you tell us about your approach in this area? As I was also impressed by it, and again, I think many people could learn from it or be inspired by your approach and what you're doing in this area.
I just had some noise that came in. Could you just say it again? Sorry, Ingrid.
Yes. So regarding funding, because it's an important aspect of any project, can you tell us about your approach in this area? Because I was also impressed by it, and many people could learn from it or be inspired by what you do in this area.
Yeah, no, thanks for saying that again. I think I was having a conversation with Dean and Lewis yesterday, actually, and we've got all sorts of funding opportunities in mind, some really big multi-million-pound things, some smaller things. And so we've got this set of possibilities, as all projects like this have. And what we talked about was, what do we actually need to do next? So rather than thinking about what this funding opportunity is and how to kind of shape ourselves to line up to it, and be dragged around, what do we actually need to do next? Because we should have confidence that if we get that right, then people will agree with us and fund it. So what do we need to do next? And should we have almost like kind of a range of, we need to make progress with the next stage. So what's the cheapest way of doing it? If we don't get much money, how can we do that, but in a kind of a minimum viable way, the most cost-effective way? Then maybe what does the middle version of that look like? And what does the big version of that look like? So we're going to do it. We might be able to do it faster and deeper if we get lots of funding. But we need to be able to make progress even if we're really short on cash. So to have that sense of, we're not going to be dragged around by funders, but we're also going to be ready to demonstrate that we can make progress with a small amount of money or a big amount of money. Most of it at the moment is philanthropic funding. So we're funded by Esme Fairbairn Foundation at the moment, who are absolutely brilliant. We're speaking to others as well who are similar. And what the reason that they're brilliant is they recognize that you need people to be able to make progress, and those people need enough freedom to be able to just build the thing and not have to meet loads of outcomes and get dragged around. So funders like Esme Fairbairn recognize, and it's not huge amounts of money, recognize that you just need a core team. If the idea is good and so on, you just need a core team and give them space to build, and then that core team can develop bigger funding applications or new instruments to get local companies to invest and support or whatever. So that core funding has been amazing. So my advice would be, find, if it's a project that's in any way comparable to what we're doing here, is find out how you can get a small core funded and established, because they will then develop all the opportunities around future funding and so on, future opportunities.
Yeah,
that's really, really critical. And be ready. So don't look around for funding opportunities. Sit down and design that proposition now, so that when the funding opportunity comes along, you're ready and you can just tweak it. So don't wait, just say, right, what is it, and let's build the proposition, and then you can go off and find the money.
Yeah, I really like this agile way of working in perspective. That's really clever. So let me know if I'm right, but I have in mind that you said you started Sussex Bay about 5 years ago.
Yeah, I mentioned at the beginning the council's strategy and so on. So that's been in place for some time. I would say with Sussex Bay kind of as a whole idea, about 2.5 years, I would say, and all of those conversations that I mentioned in the lead up.
So I wanted to ask you again for learnings, what has been your biggest challenge during these past years, and what would you say has been your biggest breakthrough so far as well?
So I think the biggest challenge is really time, isn't it? Because a bit like we were just saying about funding, is really at the beginning, I think, as every project, every entrepreneur knows, you have to just put a load of effort in, don't you? And it's extra, so it's extra to the day job. And so unfortunately, the secret is having a person that is just prepared to put a lot of discretionary additional effort in to get something new to happen. That's the same, like if we're in a job, when I was in my 20s, I was sat in an administrative job that was really boring. So I just did the extra work without being paid for it to, build a website and whatever on the side as an extra. And then opportunities it went from there. So the biggest challenge is securing time, and I was personally lucky that I had control over my time enough and support from my boss and people around me to give me that time, that trust that it would be a good use of time, and so on. Yeah. So the biggest challenge is getting started, because it's largely unfunded activity. I think often it's extra. The biggest challenge is to build acceptance of a new idea that comes into a system that didn't know it needed it. So and for me, I'm not an environmental scientist. I'm not trained in sustainability. I've picked it up as a generalist. And so one of the big challenges is to be accepted as a leader in this kind of way, in a subject that I don't have a degree for, I don't have a track record particularly on, but to be accepted as a generalist who can add hopefully value. And so the biggest challenge, I mean, people have been amazing, but it's also inevitably you start to do things that some organizations, I think we should be doing that, not you, And so there's a bit of that from time to time, but the biggest opportunity in the end, which feels like a challenge, is reaching out and making things complex by being systemic in the way one thinks. Reaching out, making connections, at the event we talked about 200 organizations that we're working with. It's very easy to say, actually, that's overwhelming, let's just do it small. But if you push through that and just insist on connecting, then I think the rewards come. But that's a decision, is to reach out and keep connecting rather than try and keep it narrow. But it's working out.
Yeah, that's great. So let's move to the future, because we talked a lot about what you do today already. What is the big vision for the future? Do you have an image in mind when you will think, this is working, this is what I want to see?
Yeah, I think so I live in Stenning, I mentioned earlier, I think, and I drive down to the coast, and there's this beautiful sign that says you're leaving the South Downs National Park. So whenever I drive down there, I imagine a nice kind of more blue sign saying something like "Welcome to Sussex Bay." And so in my mind, I have this sense of one day this will be a place that people visit, refer to, use in the language, and people will understand more about what's hidden underneath the waves. Those habitats will be restored. There'll be all sorts of new activities like seaweed farming and oyster farming and amazing thriving small boat fishing communities that are catching lots of stuff sustainably. There'll be fish being sold and lobsters being sold under the Sussex Bay brand. People will be visiting Sussex, having Sussex wine and Sussex lobster. Kids will be getting trained in marine science and restoration and getting jobs in the field. All sorts of things that come from bringing nature back and bringing communities back. And I think it feels like it will be, hopefully, a place which has reinvented its relationship to nature.
Yeah, that's a beautiful vision. I mean, I can definitely visualize it as you speak, and everybody can benefit. So I've been so infused by your event in Brighton that I wanted to ask you also, for people listening, are you planning more events like this one in the future?
Well, you can imagine it was quite a big thing to put on, and I think in some ways it's a one-off, that kind of thing. You only launch once, but what we want to do next, we're just thinking through the best way to do this. Yeah, so we're thinking about how we can manifest community events all along the coast. So the big launch was in Brighton, and we want to partner up with local groups and take opportunities to partner up with others so that we can manifest Sussex Bay in terms of progress and engagement all along the coast. We're starting to reach out and work with the local independent cinemas. So we're hoping to be able to have kind of a on an annual basis, maybe attached to World Oceans Day, a kind of a festival which brings together, you know, films, local films and national and international films around seascape related films. So to do that, and then to show up in other people's events and spaces so that we're present in other people's projects and spaces as well. So we also want to do an annual report, and I think the annual report will be perhaps a little bit more inventive around gathering people together. And I think the use of online is going to be really important to keep the conversation going. So I mentioned earlier that Dean's doing these kind of, I think we're calling them hashtag Sussex Bay type events. So the creative conversation, the funding conversation and stuff. So we want to carry on cost effectively, because, you know, arranging an in-person event is quite a big thing, but to have online, you know, lunch sessions and things like that feels like we can carry on opening up and extending the reach in a simple way. So yeah, a few things that we've got in planning.
Yeah, that sounds great. Really interesting. So regarding creating a template for others, I think you did mention this with some of your neighboring regions, but I definitely believe that many people are going to be interested in what you do with Sussex Bay, because you have started laying the foundations of an incredible restoration project locally. And it would be so great to see this happening everywhere. So is experience and expertise sharing something important to you locally and perhaps beyond the local regions?
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned earlier the connections we're making to the Solent and Cornwall and Tyneside. And I think, like, step one is to really build that connection with those 3 or 4 places, just to understand. It's easy to kind of create a network in theory, but so many times I don't know, when I join them, it feels a bit frustrating because you're just hearing updates from each other and stuff, and it's not practical. It's not. So we need to just test what that network looks like, where we're genuinely helping each other, learning from each other, helping each other's work on something together, that kind of thing, and you know, offloading and complaining with each other and whatever we need to do, so that network is really purposeful and useful. And then I think we'll just work out the next steps of growing that network. And there might be, I don't know, it might be a personal preference, but when you get beyond about 8 people, the conversation starts to be different, less honest, more kind of sit back and stuff. So we might need to think about how to get a big network working in a way which allows people to really be honest and open with each other and more practically helpful to each other. So we'll work that out. But I'm really keen on that. And of course, there'll be, the thing is, it depends. It won't. So I'm from a local authority, and it won't necessarily be always the local authority where the spark happens. It might be a different organization. So we're going to need to be mindful of that, because it's almost about the local authority, sorry, the local person or the local group that wants to be the thing that makes it begin. So we need to be open to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny because I just discussed this with a guest on my last podcast, that she keeps groups are limited to 7 to 8 people for the exact same reason you mentioned. So that's quite funny that you mention it as well. And I love your approach, as you said before, to organize groups now and more groups of expertise in certain areas. I think that's a great approach. So last 2 questions for you. So you got very emotional at the event and you actually managed to make me cry. So I wanted to ask you, on a personal basis, are you proud of what you have achieved so far?
Yeah, really, really, really proud. You know, I've just about got used to being the person at the front, if you know what I mean, on a personal level. So my leadership is, you know, I'm hoping that it's helpful and normal to sort of be a little bit, find it a little bit weird to be out the front, if you know what I mean. So I think, in a sense, people probably can see that I'm not the sort of person to be striding ahead with a flag kind of thing. It's more about sort of facilitating others. And, you know, the emotion comes from, you know, as with Eric, who we spoke about earlier, you know, the emotion is from thinking about the loss of our own experience, of other people's experience, of alienation, you know, between communities and nature. There's quite a deep sense of sadness, and you know, the hope comes from responding to that loss and that sadness, from saying, you know, we absolutely can make this different. We can do something positive and active to make a difference and not dwell too long in that sadness. But it is that spurs us on. You know, we want the excitement and the joy that I had as a kid on Brighton Pier. That we need to bring that back if it's been lost. And so, you know, the connection, I think, is ultimately about people. You know, for me, quite amazing people have deep connection to nature itself, and I think I get that, but I also feel more strongly about the reaction that people have when they're just out enjoying themselves, whether they're kite surfing, fishing, swimming, snorkeling. This is just joyful stuff. And I think that came across from what I was saying and from what some of the others were saying about what it means to us as people, trying to bring more of those experiences back.
Yeah, and I think that's something you do beautifully, I think, to expand our views of what it means to work on a restoration project. And it's not forcefully all the traditional ways of being connected to nature, as you say.
Yeah.
So, Paul, I always end this podcast with the same question, to know you for a different angle. If you were a color, what would it be and why?
I mean, honestly, even before Sussex Bay started, it would have been blue.
Okay.
And I remember I was Googling it earlier because I knew you were going to ask the question, and I haven't been able to find the name of the piece or the artist, but in Tate Modern, the gallery in London,
Yeah.
I think it's probably still there, but I think it was like a fixed, in one of the galleries that doesn't change. There's this beautiful piece of stone, like an obelisk, and in the middle of it is a perfect square cut. And it's so strange because when you look at it, you can't really tell whether it's a flat surface or whether it's got depth. This blueness has no form. It could either be flat or deep, and it's really weird. It's like a visual. It's a beautiful experience because is that a hole or not? And you kind of put your hand in it, and it is a hole. And it's a beautiful color, and it reminds me of what blue means for me, because if you look up in the sky, it's got that sense of flatness and depth. It's mysterious.
Yeah.
And then of course when you're swimming and you look down, particularly in the deep ocean, if you go a bit too far out when you're snorkeling, it starts to get really deep and a bit kind of unfathomable. And I find that both intriguing and a bit scary. And blue does that for me whenever I see it in the sky or in the ocean or in this sculpture. And it's just a really lovely natural color, which has got energy in it, as well as a bit of kind of mystery.
Fantastic. I love that. So thank you for bringing your color to the Shades of Life podcast. And thank you for joining me today, Paul. For me, it was really important to be able to share your local project and what you aim to do with Sussex Bay as an inspiration for other local projects, and, showing that it is possible, showing what other peoples do helps plant seeds that can grow into something much bigger. And that's what you are doing. So I wanted also to say a big hurrah to everyone who is already involved in Sussex Bay, because I've been so impressed by the community spirit. That was really fantastic to see.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And Ingrid, I hope we can bring you into the conversation as well. And there are so many amazing people around that can help. So thanks for the opportunity to speak to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Paul, and thank you everyone for watching and listening.
Thanks, Ingrid.
I'm living 5 minutes from the sea. I'm living 5 minutes from the sea.